Hey guys.
Hello.
Hello, happy Wednesday.
Yes, happy Wednesday indeed. Today we have a very exciting event, so let's get started. I think before we go into the details of our speaker today, let's go to the next slide.
Yep, quick introduction to Google Developer Space. So we are a home for developers and startups from around the region to learn and connect with one another. And we regularly host events with developers and startups on our YouTube channel. So you can just search for Google Developer Space Singapore and you'll find us. So really excited for today's session, organized by Big O, Julius, and Wei Yuan. I'll pass it over to the both of you.
All right, so this is, every time we have our events, we also want to share about our social and all of our details of events that we're going to be introducing in a few minutes. Usually shared in our different social accounts. So if you are here for the first time, welcome. And if you're interested in seeing like what are the past events we have done, and also events that we're going to be doing in the near future. In fact, in the next 1 month, we have actually like up to three events already in the works planning for about it. So do check out our website as well as our Facebook and also our YouTube account. If you're watching from YouTube, hi, and hopefully you enjoy today's event. And also make sure you subscribe to our YouTube account.
Yep, and similarly for DevSpace, do follow us on our channels. So we have our website and Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube as well.
Okay, so actually today we are only streaming over to Developer Space, the YouTube account, as well as our Facebook page, and also from YouTube if you are watching that. Yeah. Let's go to the next slide. All right. So as part of the our collaboration with the GDG group, we're always looking for speakers who want to share their knowledge with the community. So if there is something a private project you're working on, maybe some open source project that you are already working on for a few months, do and if we want to share with the rest of the community, do write in to us at that link over there in the screen. Share with us your idea. We'll review it, and then we'll keep in touch with you, let you know how we can collaborate with you to best get your voice out there, to the rest of our community. And yes, as always, of course, for our events, we also have our sponsors. I think most of our events, if you have been here for a few times, you would have known that, mostly we have been sponsored by Harbor. But if this is your first time, just to introduce to you our sponsor, Harbor itself is a construction-based construction management digital platform. It's a startup that is currently based in Singapore. And basically the startup, like, a few of our audiences, like if you have been part of one of our past events in regards to the transferring the tech, right, you would have already met Eunice, who was one of our PMs who was from Harbor. In fact, both me and Julius are also from this company as well. Julius, do you want to introduce this slide, say?
Oh yeah, sure. I guess most of our viewers actually know where this space is, which probably we are all scared to go right now. It's the airport, or like right next to the airport. Hubble has been used to kind of build joy at Changi, as many of you might know, who has been following us for a while. Likewise, if you have seen the new Razer HQ in the news, they're also using Hubble to build their headquarters. Where's the other one? Oh, no, we missed one slide. But anyway, there's another slide that's supposed to say that Hubble is also being used to build Punggol Digital District. As you all might know, a lot of very famous companies are coming over in the next few years, such as Boston Dynamics. Robots is going to take over the world. So yeah, if Hubble will be part of the success of our robotic overlords, just in case they take over. Um, anyway,
Black Mirror episode.
we have to serve our. There's quite interesting term that says something like some basilisk, Rocco's basilisk or something like that, whereby the idea is that like you need to actually uh, make sure that you serve your eventual overlord, because they can look back and see who actually resisted them. and punish them afterwards. So anyway, not relevant for Big O, but here's something quite interesting actually that we would like to share with you as well. We find that once a month event may not be as cool if you can do twice a month, and we we felt that a lot of the events over the past several months has been quite heavy in terms of engineering productivity. Now we're going to talk about application security. In the other months as well, we have been talking about heavy topics, right? But we want to be able to have some conversations with you also, a bit of a table topic, during this time of pandemic. Having all these work and more work at home, like it's very hard to kind of balance, right? All these nuances along the way. So we want to be able to have a lighter touch for Big O, and we decided to try out this new set of events called Small Talk. If you have white hairs like me, you probably know what Small Talk is. But apparently, when we were trying to decide what the name of this kind of new program is going to look like, Wayan doesn't know. Very sad for me. So apparently, for most of you who probably don't know what Small Talk is, back in the dinosaur age, it was one of the most famous object-oriented programming language before Java, before Swift, before all those famous languages that we were all playing around with. There was Smalltalk. You see that balloon right there. So back then as well, apparently we are not very good at coming up with logos, and Smalltalk has a balloon as a logo for some reason. So yeah, anyway, in 2 weeks' time, we will have a small talk, with Jasin, with Wayan, just to kind of talk about mentoring in tech. So we hope you join us. Um, Afterwards, in September, we are going to invite the big boss of developer space, Bok. Many of you probably know him. And then we'll ask him about his journey working in various places in the world, such as Australia, the US, Singapore, yada yada. That'll be quite interesting as well. Um, Also, we have an event coming up in October where we are going to talk to Nandini from Facebook, and she's going to share a lot about her entire journey, how she started with software engineering all the way to where she is now, and all the journey in between. I think that this is a fantastic opportunity to listen to Nandini, not just because there's quote unquote Facebook there, but also because she's one of the most brilliant engineers that we have talked to in the past. And we think that a lot of her experience is very, very relevant for our growth as we become more and more senior in this industry. So please do look forward to that. Um, and also, of course, without further ado, as everyone has been, kind of waiting for Sean to come up on stage, just to kind of briefly introduce Sean. Sean is a lead application security engineer at Immersive Labs, and he used to be a software engineer prior to that. He's primarily focused on web-based application security with special interest in TLS-related subjects. He's also very experienced in providing technical leadership in relation to application security, as well as kind of engaging teams to improve security systems. Please, no more LinkedIn, no more SolarWinds, no more what else? Oxford, Cambridge Analytica, not Oxford, sorry, Oxford, and all those things in between. So without further ado, bringing Sean in. Hi, Sean.
Hi there. Thanks for having me. Great to be on
Yeah.
and meet you all and give this talk.
Yeah, so good to see you. So we're gonna hide behind the curtain and off you go. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you again, and thank you for the lovely introduction. I am a bit jealous of some of the buildings that you have over that side of the world. They look absolutely amazing. Maybe one day I'll get to visit them. So yeah, thank you for attending and taking your time to attend this. Application security is one of the topics that I have a great passion about. As mentioned, I've come from a development background, so I've always had a passion for security, and then that's kind of how I delved into the application security point of space, is from that development background and having that passion for security. I view application security as probably one of the most important parts of security. Others may argue against me. They may say theirs is more important. And hopefully this talk, as well as the questions at the end, might help shed light on why I feel that is so important. And yeah, so without further ado, let's crack on. So if you look at the definition of application security on something like Wikipedia, here's the definition. At the end of the day, application security can be boiled down to fixing bugs and preventing bugs. Security is a vulnerabilities is a specific type of flaw or issue or bug in software that allows someone to do something that they shouldn't. And that's what it really boils down to. But it's not as easy as that. Like, things are getting harder to prevent. Things are getting more complicated. So how do we deal with this, and why is it important? So again, if you go look at security, I kind of boil down the causes of security issues and incidents and vulnerabilities into kind of 3 categories, if you really boil it down. The first being a software vulnerability. So a bug or flaw within software that someone's introduced, either maliciously, which is thankfully very rare, but often unintentionally. Then you also have hardware flaws and vulnerabilities. So this is actually issues or flaws within the physical device itself. So a good example is, in the past, if you look to Spectre and Meltdown, which were vulnerabilities with the Intel processors, so the actual physical hardware device itself. And then you got misconfiguration. So this is where it's nothing with the software, but someone hasn't enabled something or set some wrong configuration, and it's resulted in a security weakness. And if you're looking at it from a pure software development point of view, you can kind of boil it down into these 2. So obviously, software vulnerabilities, a large part of that is in software development, but misconfiguration as well. Thankfully, we're moving away from this notion of everyone needs to know everything and moving towards a scenario where we have security by default. But traditionally in the past, this wasn't the case. We always had these things where you had to bolt on security. So a good example is if you look at like S3 buckets, right? When those first came out, it was the onus was on those who were setting up the S3 buckets to know they had to do these sort of switches and flicks of the configuration. It was never you switch on an S3 bucket and out of the box, it will have all the right settings there to make it secure. And then you have to go and disable things to fit into your situation. Thankfully, this is changing a lot, but it's still largely there, especially with more legacy systems. So that's why I kind of still deem that as part of application security, because that should be built into the software or service offering, having that secure by default. So you can see like kind of 2 of the major causes are down to application security or application development. And kind of touched on this already. So why is this all important? Like, what does it actually mean from us? And I think one of the things that we need to do is to actually take a step back and look at where we've come from and where we're going. So if you look back in the way we used to develop things, certainly when I started off my career, you built everything from the ground up. So all software was developed within the confines of the organization that you were working for. You started a project, and the very first line of code will be for that project, and all that code will pretty much live within that project. And then when we came to releasing the software into production environments, it was done in these big releases, monolithic releases. So you had like your quarterly release or your biannual release. So all these massive realms of functionality shipped out in big releases, a lot of testing that went into it before that happened. And that obviously had some drawbacks, but also had some positives. So from a security point of view, this enabled security teams, yes, they had a lot of work on them to kind of review all these changes and test them from a security perspective. But if you're doing that twice a year, well, guess what? You could probably allocate a security team 3 or 4 weeks to span reviewing that, and you knew when that was coming, so you could plan ahead for that. If we look towards today, though, we've completely changed. I mean, think about it. If you're going to go build a project, you'd probably be frowned upon if you want to build everything in that project, every piece of line of code in that project yourself. What you typically do today is look to a framework as well as libraries and try look if there's functionality there already and just try bolt it on. So that's where this image kind of comes in, is we building things with these different blocks, so frameworks and libraries. And I kind of think of applications today rather being glue rather than actually being built from the ground up. So you kind of glue all these different things together and get them working with one another. And this is great. I mean, why reinvent the wheel? It allows for collaboration and innovation and foster development, and it's fantastic. But it does have some drawbacks from a security point of view. And then also, if you look at the way we're releasing these changes into production environments, some organizations are still in the big waterfall model, but a lot of them are changing. And we now have releases on a monthly, weekly, daily, maybe even an hourly basis, depending on the organization. And that's just fantastic. I mean, we're getting changes out quicker and quicker and quicker. Smaller bite-sized changes, but they're coming a lot faster. And that's fantastic. If you look at an organization point of view, it's going to help them a lot. But from a security point of view, this is presenting a problem. How do you test these things if they're going out, like, say, for instance, on a daily basis? Now, suddenly that team that you've allocated to do all these tests, they're going to have to be available every day. That's not going to scale. That's just not going to work. So we have to reevaluate the way we've done security typically in the past. And as I mentioned, like, that CI/CD basis is fantastic from an organization point of view. They can get things out quicker to the customers, be a step ahead of the competition. And this is becoming more and more important. If your competition is releasing software and features before you, you need to really quicker play catch up and beat them to it. So CI/CD really plays into this, because it means we can get those features out in a day, a week, maybe a month at most, versus in the past, a year, every 6 months. And if you're still doing that today, you're probably not going to do well against your competitors. So that has a massive impact from a business being able to deliver, but it does have a risk from a security point of view. But there is a benefit from a security point of view as well, which I'll cover towards the end. So this is all very well. But as I mentioned, we're going to have to change the way we approach our development. So if you go look at a typical SDLC, software development lifecycle, hoping most people follow this. So firstly, design. So this is where we want to gather the requirements, make sure that we get all sort of design features and that into place. Then we'll get to build it, test it, and then release it. And in the past, security typically became before the release. So you test things before they went out. That's no longer going to scale. And also, if you then look at the way we've typically approached security in terms of application security in the past, a lot of the focus has been on developers. And that's still true largely to this day. My view is that's wrong. We need to focus on everyone in this life cycle. And as I say, security is only as strong as your weakest link. So if your developers are like amazing hotshots, secure developers, but you have weak operations folk, well, that application may be the most secure application you've ever had, but if it's put in an environment that's not securely configured, there's going to be an issue. So every single one of these different types of roles has a large impact on security. And they also have an impact on security in terms of cost of fixing. Now, I'm going to call this out because I'm not too sure if this is true or not, but that research there was done apparently by IBM. There was an article in the Register that called out that it may or not have been done, but I don't think that's the point. The point is, the sooner we find these issues, or even rather prevent these issues, the more cost effective it's going to be for an organization. And it makes sense. So think about it. If you do an application and you go, okay, great, we're going to now do this application, we'll go ahead, I don't know, some online shopping service. Great, we roll it out to production. Oops, we forgot to put authentication in. So allowing users to log in. How much more time and effort and money is going to be to try retrofit and fix that before it goes to production, versus when you're designing this going, okay, well, we need to make sure authentication's in and built as part of that plan. So when we start looking at security in terms of the SDLC going forward, we need to start having it as a part of the design phase, the implementation phase. So design, making sure we're doing things security and setting the secure requirements right at the beginning, getting the appropriate security SMEs involved in that. Implementation, obviously, prevention is better than cure. Testing, so not just relying on security folk, but building in security tests as part of your testing process. And this is what I like, is a secure SDLC, and it can even have a secure release. So the reason why I want us to remove this away is kind of going towards that secure by default. We need to start bolting on security. We need to start embedding it in. It needs to be transparent. It needs to be a part of it. And we shouldn't be thinking about it. It should just happen. So there are some challenges to doing all this wonderful stuff. At the end of the day, security and functionality are often at opposite ends of one another. Very rarely does security allow a greater functionality. It often hinders functionality. So there's often those to and fro between security and functionality. And this is where it can get really difficult, because you got two extremes. You got on one extreme, like someone who may want all the functionality in the world, and they just go, oh, security is holding us back. And then another extreme is you want someone who wants the most secure system in the world, but that's going to mean that that system is not going to be very functional or usable by its users. So it's about how we find that middle point. How do we find that balance where we have as much functionality as possible, but with the least amount of risk? And this is ultimately what security is about to an organization, is having a level of risk that a organization is willing to live with. So that risk being, what sort of impact and damage could a potential vulnerability pose to the organization, and the likelihood of that. That's how you would measure risk. So trying to reduce that to a level that the company is satisfied to live with. It may never happen, so bringing that risk down. And then on the other side, you also got competition. So this is where the need to deliver things faster and faster and stay ahead of your competitors is becoming more and more of a thing. I've certainly noticed it in the last few years, seeing it. Like, if you're not innovating and delivering things quicker than your competitor, you're going to be left behind. And ultimately, that could be really bad news for your organization. So you're going to have these mechanisms in place to not only deliver faster, but stop hindering you. And this is, again, that kind of tug of war between security and that. And this is why, as security professionals like myself, we need to look at ways that we can help enable this, not hinder this. This is becoming more and more of a bigger thing. So coming back to those initial set of slides where we looked at the way development's changing. In the past, you developed all your code on your own infrastructure and your own data center and all that. Now that's kind of flown out the window. You got someone else's code, so libraries and frameworks. You got someone else's computer, so think cloud computing, AWS, GCP, Azure. You got someone else's services, so SaaS-based solutions. So you have all these other people, and this isn't to say that they were malicious and that the vast majority of people are doing the right things and look really good. But there is still that element of trust that we have to have. We have to know that they're doing the right things, and how do we evaluate that? Go look to SolarWinds. I mean, that was a big story. Unfortunately, they got compromised. And you, as an organization, could have done everything that you could have, but because your third party got compromised, you were then affected through no fault of your own. So these are things that we're going to have to start looking to and evaluating. What happens if the service gets compromised? What can we do to prevent that? Do we even trust that service provider? Are they even doing the right things? Because it's another thing, like using someone with a legitimate service, but are they themselves doing the right security things to prevent themselves from being compromised? And another thing, a bugbear of mine perhaps, is the way we approach training around security and software security. So this here is a transcript of my degree, Bachelor of Science degree. And the things I'm pointing out there are what you could term very loosely security-related courses. In reality, I only did one security course. The others were more cryptography and mathematics around that. So applying that in a direct sense on everyday development, probably not that relevant. Even the network security course, very vague, loose touchings on securely developing applications. And this is a problem because we have people with really respected degrees and doing an amazing job going out into the world, doing all this developing and production systems. And then we moan at them because they're introducing all these vulnerabilities. But how can we moan at them when they don't even know they exist in the first place? So something like a SQL injection. I didn't know this when I left university. So I would have gone into my first job, probably introduced a whole bunch of them. I had no idea it existed. So how could someone then complain to me that, oh, I'm developing code insecurely when I didn't even know about it in the first place? So we have to start changing it from kind of the roots, getting people aware and knowledgeable in this stuff, preferably when they're learning on how to develop, make it part of that curriculum. And this is kind of reflected in the OWASP top 10. So OWASP is an open web application security project. It's a voluntary project and organization that focuses on application security. And every few years, they produce a list of the top 10 vulnerabilities. And within that list is the 2003 list, which was the first list, and then the 2017 list, which is the current list. And if you go and compare those two lists, 14 years, so a decade and a half ago, 5 of the top 10 lists are still in the same place or still within that list. So after 14 years, we still haven't solved many of the issues. So obviously something's not right. The way we're doing it is not right. So we need to take a step back and have a look at the way we're approaching some of these things. This year is also a report that my company did, Immersive Labs, earlier in this year. So we went out and asked developers, or Osterman, the company who carried out this research, went out and asked developers different things around their development and security. And one of the problems was, for instance, like 39% that didn't feel they have enough time to shift left. So organizations are not tooling developers with the sufficient resources and time, or time is really a resource at the end of the day, to help enable them to do things more securely. And again, it's that I put this down to the tie between functionality and security. Businesses are going to almost always choose functionality over security. And again, from a security team, do they have time to help development teams? they're often very under-resourced, a lot of pressure on their plates to prevent these things. So giving them time to help train and provide guidance to developers is becoming more difficult. And another thing that came out of the report is that people are releasing known code, vulnerable code. And many people might be shocked and go, oh, try to blame the developers or developing managers. And I don't. I think one of the problems to this is the drive to deliver functionality. But also, I think there's a lack of an awareness and knowledge of what some of those vulnerabilities actually mean. So if you look at something like a cross-site scripting vulnerability, which typically the way we demonstrate it is show an alert box that pops up. Now, if that's the worst thing that's going to happen to my customer, I'm not going to really be worried about it. Like, why would I put that much attention to fixing that vulnerability versus some functionality going out to a customer? But in reality, that vulnerability is far more worse, but we don't show that. So again, trying to get this knowledge into developers. So coming towards the end, so what lies ahead? So these are the things I've started with the negatives. Hopefully we can end off on a better positive note. But some of the things that I see as negatives, or maybe concerns is maybe a better term, are software supply chain attacks. So this is something I've been banging on for a few years now, and I think it's going to get worse. So if you look at it from an attacker point of view, what better way to get an organization? If I get in a library, I can get into the production system. And not only that, if I do it in like open source library, I can get into thousands of organizations' systems. So bang for buck wise, software supply chain tax is where I can fit in. And again, one of the other problems with this is just the sheer volume. So that kind of comes down to my other point there, volume and speed. Like the explosion of open source is awesome to see. It's really fantastic. But attackers can use that to their advantage and hide in that just sheer volume. And you trying to find something is like finding not just a needle in a haystack, but a needle in haystacks, like a whole field of them. It's just going to be really difficult. Software supply chain vulnerability. So this is a little bit different from attacks from the point of view, like attacks is more perhaps attackers embedding themselves in software supply chain. So using the software supply chain as a mechanism for their payload and their exploits and attacking customers, where software supply chain vulnerabilities is those flaws that attackers then can use to gain access to customers. So a good example is Equifax. Equifax was using a vulnerable version of Apache Struts, and the attackers used that to gain access to that organization. Dependency management is an absolute nightmare. I've been down this road. I'm doing some research on it, and I'm pulling my hair out because I can understand why developers can be so frustrated with this. It's not an easy problem to solve, but hopefully we'll get better at it. Business logic flaws is going to become a bigger thing that we need to start focusing on. And partly because of this is, if you look to the OWASP top 10, I think we're kind of getting to a point where we're going to solve a lot of those problems. And that's through the addition of frameworks and libraries that do all these secure things by default. So a while ago, I went to go do a pen test with a team that I was part of our organization, and I couldn't find anything. There weren't secure developers. There weren't that versed in secure development, but I couldn't really find anything. And a large part of that is because they were using Django, and Django covered a lot of things out of the box. So a lot of the security flaws that we'll probably find going forward are more the business logic flaws. So things around software development and that kind of thing. Volume and speed. Sorry about my son there. So yeah, I've already covered that. So things are just moving so fast. Lack of awareness and training. We have to get folk trained up and aware that these things exist, and more importantly, their impact. the why. Why should I be worried about this? Too often we're like, oh, that's a vulnerability, you need to go fix it. Why? Because we need to be more engaging, stand the impact. What does it actually mean for you and your organization? Legacy stuff is going to become a bit of a burden. So as we move towards those newer frameworks and that, legacy software and that's going to be more cumbersome to maintain and make sure we don't have vulnerabilities in that. Buzzword bingo. So lately all the rage, like the latest blockchain and AI and all of that, they all have uses, but I think all too often some organizations and groups perhaps attach those to those words, and they're going to solve all our problems. And unfortunately, they may portray it in such a way that they will, when in fact they won't. But now try looking to some positives. So as I mentioned, like the libraries and frameworks that are coming out, I've really been impressed as I've seen them coming out. Like the amount of work that they've put into making sure that things are secure by default. So things like cross-site scripting and SQL injection effectively become a thing of the past if using these frameworks and libraries correctly. And that just helps developers. It means that they can just get stuck in and doing what they like and love, is developing things and not worrying about these other things, such as how you prevent cross-site scripting and SQL injection. Tools. So there's becoming more and more tools now. If I went back to 2013 and I looked back at the amount of tools that we have available now, I'll be grinning from ear to ear. Like the amount of tools that we have available to us now is really encouraging. It's super exciting. And even better, like a lot of those tools are free and open source. So that comes back to how do we solve this speed in that tooling, automation, building these tools into your process. So that's helping enable us to do that. Also, our training is becoming better. The way we approach some of these things, especially as a community security community, we've realized like the way we've approached some of the stuff in the past hasn't been right. So we're trying to change that. We're trying to be a more engaging with developers. Having things like this, I think, are awesome way of doing that. Getting our message across, but also equally getting your message as a developer. What does it mean to us? What are some of the issues that you face when we try to put these security things in place? And it also comes down to that collaboration. So I know within the InfoSec community, especially on the likes of Twitter, there's actually a lot of developers involved in that. And having that engagement, having that networking to and from is fantastic. And at enterprise level, enterprises, again, engaging with communities and individuals. And that goes same for research. So there's a lot of research, people doing amazing work, both from the community and enterprises, and then feeding that back into that community. Things are speeding up, but we have things to help enable that. So we now get to a point where we can hopefully help businesses speed up without being a hindrance. And then lastly, like there's a massive amount of passion on security. Go look at the community. A lot of people openly spend their free time working on the stuff, which shows a sheer passion for this. So in closing, you may ask, where do we start? Well, when you look to open application security, it might seem like an absolute mountain to climb, and it often is quite a mountain to climb. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be done. So my advice is start off small, focus on what I call the bang for your buck, the quick wins. So things like a source code scanner, which will scan your source code for known vulnerabilities. That's a good win. It's going to find things that are pretty immediately obvious. Same as a automated testing, so dynamic scanner. So this is testing the live running application. Again, we'll find low-hanging fruits. So things that are quick and easy to find, could have a high impact, and should be relatively easy to fix. Dependency management, so this comes to the whole open source software library. You have to know what you have and you have to know what impact those things have. And then frameworks. Use the frameworks. Like, as I said, they become really great. A lot of them cater for 80% of the kind of secure coding stuff. I pulled that figure out of my head, please don't quote me on it, but they do a lot of work. So you can then really focus on the important aspects. So again, the functionality done, and then your secure design. So how do you prevent the business logic flaws? And then lastly, the knowledge and awareness. So this to me is important. Like, given the tools, given that the knowledge that allow developers to do these things securely and know why is really key. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Sean. That was really insightful. Shall we move to the Q&A?
Yeah, I think we should move to the Q&A. That's usually where the party begins.
So for those who are watching from YouTube, if you have any questions, do ask them in the comments section. Once we see your questions, and we'll pick them up and highlight them. Ask them to Sean as well. But let's start off with some questions that were sent in before the event. So I do have this very interesting question over here. So I'm just going to read off the question. Security is defined as defined by the weakest link. How do we ensure that every engineer in the company has security as their primary concern? So I guess this is more for like culture. How do you build in the culture of security is important to every single engineer?
Sorry, didn't press the button hard enough. I think this comes from the top down. So management have to engage with security, not just say security. I've seen this before where security is used as a keyword by management. They don't believe in it. You have to have them to believe in it. If their reports start seeing like they view this as an important thing, then that will help encourage that culture of security. But also providing the tools. So it's one thing to say, oh, we're going to do security, but I'm not going to provide you the time or the tooling or the knowledge to do that. That's not going to help anyone either. So having that training available, and don't just make it those boring PowerPoint slides, please. Make it engaging. Get things like hackathons. Hackathons are awesome way. Get people engaged and working together, sharing ideas, sharing knowledge. That again helps foster that security culture. And then the tooling, get the tooling in to help make your developers' lives easier. So there's a lot of tooling now that builds into your IDEs. That goes a long way. So if I'm writing something insecurely, it can pop up, go, well, you may want to look at that straight away. That's going to make my life easier.
Awesome.
So
yeah. Good.
I was just going to say, stop making security a roadblock and like actually enable people to do things securely. That's
Agreed with that. I think following up from that question, so I think for big companies, it is definitely possible to sort of bring in that programs to train your employee and make it an interesting experience, a well-rounded experience for all your employees. But how about for let's say if you're a startup? So I think just now you did give some tips, for small companies or beginners, where to start. But in the case of a startup, right, I think there's also a concern, in terms of budget constraints. So let's say for a small organization or a small team, how would you recommend, in terms of what kind of strategy should they take in beefing up their security given the budget constraints?
So as I mentioned, like thankfully there's a lot of tools now that are free and open source. So tooling is going to be one of your best allies. Your source code scanners, your dynamic scanners, and then your SCAs, which is your software composition analysis. For a lot of languages, there are free ones out there that you can use. They may not be the best, but guess what? They're going to be good enough. They're going to be better than nothing. Using that as a launch point to kind of get those low-hanging fruits, because ultimately you got to start somewhere, right? And using that will also get people familiar with some of the things around security, like cross-site scripting, SQL injection, and the other vulnerability types out there. Also, engage with the community. Like, a lot of people are willing to help out, especially companies trying to start off and get their footing on the ground. I know a lot in the community will openly and happily help them, often, or more often than not, for nothing. And engaging the likes of someone like OWASP, who have local chapters around the world, is a really good way of doing that. And also, the other thing is getting secure training in place. So there are resources like the OWASP who have a lot of documentation, and then you're just trying to build something that you can present to your team in terms of training and making it interesting. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. You can get things like CTS that some people have already developed online and shared online, and build that into with your OWASP top 10. That would be my recommendation.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely agree with the notion of getting in touch with your local chapters. Like, a lot of these tech events are usually affordable, if not free. It's definitely good to start from there, start from the documentations, their videos, their tutorials. Thanks for the answer.
Cool. We also have a question from the audience. Hi, Chester. Good to see you again. So his question is along the lines of, some specific examples on how security is integrated by default in a library. It seems to have a lot to do with, in this age as well, which you did kind of highlighted also today, whereby we use a lot of open source. And so kind of how to kind of make sure that, it's secure and stuff.
Yeah. So a good example is like cross-site scripting, right? If you go look to some of the later frameworks, so Django, Flask. So I haven't developed in a while, so I'm just putting things out of my head that I recently know about. Even Ruby on Rails. Ruby on Rails is another good example. If you use them straight out the bat, like no configuration, they're going to effectively HTML code your output, which effectively kills cross-site scripting. So that's a good example of security by default. Now, you can disable that, but that requires you to do some sort of tweak to your code or configuration. So you actually have to go out of your way to change something. That is that security by default that we want to start having more of. Where in the past, it would have either been the developer having to do their own HTML encoding. So, hey, I got to now use this library that does HTML encoding and making sure I include in my code, or there's some hidden setting somewhere that unless you know the ins and outs of, you're not going to know to enable. So that's kind of the example of where we're shifting from the industry.
Cool. And do you mind if we ask a follow-up as well? So earlier you did mention using a bunch of software tools, kind of static analysis to kind of see the source code and so forth. Do you have any specific recommendations, like tools that you find was useful?
This one's going to be hard to answer because there's twofold. So if you look into open source, a lot of the open source tools focus primarily on one language. So if you're looking at things like Rails, it's Brakeman, Python, it's Bandit. Those are my recommendations for those if you're looking for open source. But then if you're looking at commercial offerings, they typically offer then a broader range of languages. So Veracode, Snyk started source code scanning as well. What I would recommend is go search OWASP source code scanning, or SAST, SAST, and they have a whole list of different scanning tools out there, and you can go through that list. One thing I would recommend is if you are using these tools, just test several of them out. Obviously, if your choice is you do an open source and there's only one open source, well, guess what? That's your choice. But if you, especially a commercial offering, find a vulnerable software. So there are like libraries that you can search, that you can use to test, and then you can benchmark them against each other, finding to see what things are found, how well they'll build and work with your build system and so forth.
Sounds good. The link to, I guess, the recommendation to use the OWASP SAST reference is a very good place for us to actually look for it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, they have a whole list there, so it's best to go through there, because as I said, like it's going to be difficult without knowing what specific language in that framework.
Makes sense.
Okay, we have another question pre-submitted. So this question over here is asking, how do we ensure that, as an organization, you're always ahead of bad actors in protecting our users, of course, the company itself?
If you find the answer to this, you're going to be a very, very, very rich person. Yeah, so the problem with security, it's always a cat and mouse game. Like, you're always going to be playing typically a catch up. So, and it makes sense. Think about it. Organization not only has to focus on security, they have to focus on things like performance, reliability, functionality, all of that. So you have to share all of that resources. And with security, you have to be secure 100% of the times. From an attacker point of view, they have all the time. That's all they focus on, is trying to, especially if they're targeting a specific organization, they have all the time in the world to find that one hole. Often they just have to find one hole where you have to find everything. And this is why security is so difficult. And this is why you often hear people talk about it's not a matter of when, it's a matter of if. So comes down to that risk that I was talking about earlier. You're never going to eliminate risk. It's trying to remove that risk to a level that's acceptable. And that's how you stay ahead of the attackers. Make it as difficult as possible for them, so they hopefully go somewhere else. I know that might not sound nice, but that's the reality, is hopefully they either just give up, hopefully, but they may also then decide to do something else. But also don't panic. Like there's going to be a time where you're probably going to be compromised. It's just a reality. And that's not a bad thing. That's not saying you're terrible and you've done a bad job. The important thing is how you react to that. That's why I evaluate companies not on when they breach, but how they react to a breach. Use that as a learning experience for the next time so it doesn't happen again. Because it's going to happen to the best of us. Many large orgs have been compromised and they have loads of resources to put into it. So don't panic, learn from it, but also prepare for it. That's kind of how you would stay ahead, if you could phrase it that way.
Very much agree with that. I think, experience will help to shape your future, how you want to deal with incidents like this. I think as a follow-up to this question, so you did mention about, breaches will occur, you'll learn from it. How about in the instance of it happening, if, in this event of the breach, what should a company look towards doing? Like, let's say, in the case of, like, just now you talked about crypto as well, for a short part. I think there was like big issues like the DAO hack, where like millions of cryptocurrency got locked out because of sometimes it's not malicious actor, it's just some harmless person trying to experiment and stuff, and things break. Like, how should we react in that as a company?
So I think the first thing is don't panic. A few years back, I was involved in a breach where the company panicked. They're like, we need everyone on deck, and it was just a bunch of people running around not knowing what they're doing, that kind of thing. So first step is just take stock. Take a breather, take a step back, figure out what's going on, and then take it from there. So this is also where you should have your preparations beforehand. So your kind of tabletop exercises to prepare for an event like this. Any company who doesn't have this, I say should seriously have a look at this. Like, what are the things that we're going to do? So are we going to go to the media? What are we going to say to the media? If you go look to the TalkTalk breach in the UK that happened a few years ago, they got their CEO in front of the media and saying it was the Russian-based Islamic jihadist or something like that. That's not a good look. You really don't want that to go out to the media. So making sure that you have your person speaking to the media, given the right information for that specific point in time, and then also conduct a full investigation to find out what happened initially, and then react to that. And then afterwards have a retrospective review as to how you can prevent it happening again. Because the last thing you want to do is do all this work and then they do it again. Unfortunately, customers have been in that situation. So yeah, but first point, don't panic. Take a step back, take stock of what happened. If it means a day outage, then it means a day outage. Explain and be transparent. Open and transparent is another thing. Don't try to hide things. It's almost always going to end up badly if you take and try to shift blame or hide things. Just take it, as I said, it happens to the best of us. Doesn't mean you've done a bad job.
Thanks for the answer.
Do you have any thoughts if how often should we blame the intern, like SolarWinds?
Yeah, please don't do that. Please. That's kind of what I mean, like those PR disasters. So in the case of SolarWinds, yeah, the intern may have done something, but guess what? It's your company's fault. You should have had processes and things in place to prevent an intern doing what they did. If an intern could cause a production outage like that, that's not the intern's fault. That's entirely your process's fault. And that's where the investigation should go, not go, oh, it's the intern. It would say, well, we've identified we had some issues in our processes. We are looking to do this to prevent it from happening again. That's going to come off a lot better. Whereas if it's the intern's fault in the press, that's just going to be a PR disaster. So don't do that, please.
Yeah, that makes sense. By the way, Sean, have you had the opportunity to, like, I guess, kind of see some really useful SOP so that, like, because like most of the non-technical people, they don't understand the security implications, right? And then the dollar value that's, caused by a breach and so forth. Are there any SOPs that we can take a look at?
Sorry, SOB in terms of my
in terms
acronyms
of, oh, I'm so sorry. Like some form of means by which a company can, like standard procedures, so that in the event of a breach, these are the steps so that, like at least there's a game plan before the breach actually happened.
Yeah, so I'm not aware of any formal ones because that's not my area of expertise. I can certainly try to find that out if that will be helpful. But I will say you definitely want to have some sort of plan in place, as I mentioned, and then react to that. Also, you'll find that those plans are going to differ from company to company. As you imagine, perhaps a online sales company might have a downtime of an hour, or a day or 2 days or whatever. That's fine. Versus some hospital, that's going to be a pretty significant issue. So their approach is going to be completely different. And that's why it's important to have a plan for your organization, so you understand who's involved where, what their responsibilities are, what their appropriate actions are going to be. And that's why that tabletop planning is so important. So you can play out these and identify shortcomings or things that you may miss.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for that. Also, I think since we're talking about breaches, right? I suppose throughout your career, you've seen a lot of, very common errors, especially in recent years, right? Could you share with us some of those? And do you see any difference between big and small companies?
So one of the errors that came out quite a bit, and I don't know, it's probably, a worrying thing is cross-site request forgery. So trying to think of explaining, because initially when I got my head around it, I was like, what? It's so confusing. Basically, it relies on the fact that your browser has cookies. Cookies are tied to a session, and any request sent from your browser will submit those cookies. So send a request on your behalf. Now, cross-site request forgery relies on this. So you would embed a request in some other site that would make a call out to that service you're attacking. So like online banking, for example. find a lot of these, in fact, when we're researching. So part of my job, my previous company, is we would research any sort of third-party product that we start incorporating into us. And a lot of these products were actually security products, and they had these cross-site request forgery vulnerabilities, or CSRF vulnerabilities in them. And those can be pretty dangerous. I mean, they do everything in context of the user logged in. So if you have an admin logged in, they could do things like create other users on the system, or delete users or modify users on the system. So you can imagine, from a security product, that's probably a bit of a worry. Thankfully, that's probably going to become less and less. Two parts for this: the move towards token-based authentication. So with modern development, single-page web applications, where you have an API that uses a token as opposed to cookies. And the other is, now cookies have these things called same-site flag on them that go a long way in helping prevent cross-site request forgery. So yeah, really, these things are both big and small security companies, even. You should know better.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, we have a very, very interesting question from our audience. I'm going to bring it up. So, what do you think about bug bounty programs in terms of integrating it with your company or any companies in general? Are they effective?
So, this is a difficult one, because yes and no. It depends. It's a really difficult one. So on the one hand, bug bounties, if you're going to make them, so you get private programs. So that's where people are like invited to your program, and not anyone can just join it and find and submit vulnerabilities. And then you get public ones. So that's where anyone, it's like wide open on the internet. So for example, the two big platforms are HackerOne and Bug Bounty. So if you have an account on there, you can see these public programs and you can submit findings. Now, one of the problems around bug bounties is people are using a lot of tools around them, and that's great. But as automation, there's often a time where you get a lot of false positives, and you could have a high volume of issues being reported when in reality they're either like not really issues or informational, or they're just completely wrong. So you could find yourself spending a lot of time trying to go through all of those and sifting out the real issues. And that could be a lot of time for someone to do. On the other hand, getting many people having eyes on your system and potentially having that 24/7 is really useful. You effectively getting people to pen test, do a penetration test, security test on your system 24/7. So that, from that point of view, they can be effective. They can find many things. I mean, if you go look to the likes of, the most recent one that I found was Shopify. They issued, and I wish I found this, because there was a GitHub token that was left in their source code, or left somewhere, I forgot exactly where. And that person got a $50,000 bounty. I'm like, damn, I wish I found that. But those are the kind of things that you want someone with a good intention finding, because if that ends up in the attacker, SolarWinds kind of scenario. So from that point of view, that came out of the bug bounty. Now, whether that would have been found outside the bug bounty or not, maybe not. But it was definitely found in the bug bounty. So I guess it comes down to how much time and effort and how you scope it for your organization. So do you make it private? Do you make it public? Because the other thing about making private, you may not get everyone that you need to, so you may not get that additional set of eyes. But if you do make it public, you may get too much. So I think it's a matter of adapting it to your organization and then rolling out and tweaking it as you need be.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing your experience on this. Slightly different question from our pre-submitted list of questions. So what do you think about policies like GDPR and CCPA? How have they affected the security industry like over the last 10? Okay, it's like actually hasn't been the last 10 years, but I would say around 4 years from now. Like yeah, I think 4 to 5 years.
I don't know. I've probably been a bit pessimistic about this. So I remember when GDPR came out this side in the EU, like everyone's going, "Oh, this is going to be the most fantastic thing. It's going to change our lives. We're going to make it better. Like everyone's going to be great." And what fears on? It's not really made that much of a significant change. I think one thing it has brought is more visibility and attention to things, which is good, but I don't think it's made the impact that people were hoping. A good example is when British Airways, their fine came out. So initially, the RCO, which is the UK Information Office, responsible for issuing the fines, came out and said, yes, we have the intent to unfire British Airways. I forgot the exact figures, so like 180 million or something like that. And everyone's going like, yes, this is the turning point. This is what GDPR is all about. And it turns out that the actual fine British Airways got was like 20 million. Now, that's certainly a step up above what we had before, which was a maximum of fine of £500,000. But it's not all that it's cut out to be. I think we still have a long way to go. I'm also a bit hesitant on relying on regulations and that kind of thing, because it too often, for me, can be a tick box exercise. And they're very not well defined. So it depends on who interprets it in different ways. You can twist and contort it to meet that tick box. Whereas actually really doing it properly is a whole nother thing. So I think we still have a long way to go on that. They have had a positive impact, but I'd say probably not as positive as we would have thought.
Just a slight follow-up question to that. Has policies like from your point of view, policies like GDPR, has there been like a much more how should I put it? Has the conversation for security has been more I don't know how to put this, but maybe upgraded or become more extensive, due to inclusion of things like GDPR? Like, do you see companies taking security more seriously because of privacy concerns like this?
I don't think so. It's certainly raised the conversation, but it's, as I said, like become more that checkbox. Let's not too much on the security, but like, are we doing the security versus does this meet GDPR? Yes, tick, done. And it comes to that point we were making earlier, like we need to start embedding that security culture. The tick box culture just is not going to work because GDPR, okay, done, tick. They're not worried about the actual security behind it. So GDPR doesn't cover a whole bunch of things from a security point of view, and it focuses on the personal data. So if you have that security culture, then suddenly it's a lot bigger than that. So it has helped to a degree, but I'd still think it's still very much that tick box mentality.
Sean, just for the interest of the audience, right? I think I just realized that GDPR is primarily understandable by people from the EU and CCPA from California. Like, can you share a bit more about what they are?
Sure. So GDPR is the general data protection requirement. I think that's the acronym. I apologize, I'm terrible with acronyms. It came out recently. I can't remember the exact date. I want to say 2018, but I could be wrong. Basically, it's a directive from the EU, so the European Union, for any EU citizen. So regardless of that citizen, if they're in the country or not, if you're processing their data, you have to adhere to GDPR. And GDPR focuses around personal data. So things like your name, address, phone numbers, that kind of thing. And this is where it gets wishy-washy, like is an IP address personal data in that? And that's why like it can get wishy-washy. But the fact is that you can request access to that data. So you can go to a company and say, hey, what data do you have on me? And also allows you to, there's restrictions on how long you can hold that data and what types of data you have, and more importantly, protections around it. So one of the big things that came out of it is if you have reason to believe of a breach of personal data, you have 72 hours to report and make that breach public. Report that breach to the country's information office. So in the UK would be the ICO, and the different countries around the world have their different information offices. So it's trying to help prevent that, sweeping under the rug, nothing to see here thing. You have to, by law, do that. The other big thing is the fines. So as I mentioned, in the UK, the maximum fine was £500,000. With GDPR, it is, I think it was 20 million or a maximum of 20 million or 4% of your annual global turnover, whichever is more. So the maximum fines have definitely significantly ramped up. And this is why I think a lot of people are putting a lot of dependency on it, because it will really start to have that bite in terms of fines. One of the negative downsides of this regulation is now companies are panicking. So every time they think they may have potentially, sent an email to someone with one person's name on, they go to the ICO and like, oh, we accidentally did a breach when they really didn't. So the ICOs or the different regulatory bodies around the world have had a massive influx of all these things coming in that they then have to process.
Interestingly, one of our audiences also, Invi, good to see you again. Invi kind of quipped about security as a service. I was going to say, can we come up with a GDPR troll as a service?
There are actually companies who do specialize in like GDPR compliance and that, and they'll come and review and that. Like, firstly, for me, I would want to stay far away from that. That's like boring to me. I wouldn't want to do compliance and governance and that. It's like, no, thank you. Some people enjoy it. They can have it.
Cool. I guess on a more serious note, I think this is an issue, a pre-submitted question, which even for Hubble, actually, we do run into, and I'm pretty sure a few other companies in Singapore. So the idea is that, whenever we want to protect data and so forth, those personally identifiable information and whatnot, we would like to encrypt them in our database, right? And sometimes, if we want to be fully secure, like in the event that an admin password has been breached, and then they're able to dump the entire database and so forth, then, everything is laid bare. So we want to encrypt certain data sometimes, but then searching becomes very slow. So do you have any thoughts around, kind of balancing between security and speed?
Yeah, it's about being pragmatic about things, right? As I alluded to earlier. So on the one hand, you could say, okay, I'm now going to encrypt everything. I have to encrypt everything. What's the risk of not encrypting everything? What if we just focus on encrypting the sensitive bits? So I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head. So if you got a online shopping site, right, and you have all your products listed there, would you need to encrypt all your products, like the data around all your products? Probably not. You probably just want to encrypt your user data, such as things like their passwords and maybe security questions if you're still doing that, or something like that. So therefore, that should hopefully help. Also, looking at the ways you're doing encryption. So if you're doing like database level encryption, maybe a better way of doing it is perhaps doing a drive encryption, and that will give you a better performance, and you still essentially getting the same sort of level of protection. There's no single answer that could answer this question. It's all going to be relevant on your organization, your use case. And this is where things like threat modeling come into it. Like, you got to be pragmatic about it. You got to look at what your threats are, how you're going to protect against those threats, and the different levels of risk that you are willing to live with. So yeah, it's and this is where design comes into it and threat modeling and that kind of stuff. So you can plan this out better.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for that. If you don't mind a follow-up, right? Like some of the breaches in the early 2010s and so forth, such as Sony, for example, and a few others, whereby, sometimes even things like the credit card details are, non-encrypted and so forth. And you can argue that, they might think that it's unnecessary, but on the other hand, it's necessary and so forth. And once this goes out to the news, it will start to become a very complex PR disaster and so forth. So in those scenarios, when because each companies will have to come up with their own trade-offs. Like, do you have any thoughts on what could be the best way to kind of explain why such and such are encrypted and the others are not?
Just own up to it. Like, no one's perfect. So if you're holding credit card data and you don't have to, own up to it. Like, yeah, we were wrong. We didn't need to hold it. So we're going to evaluate and we're going to find a way to scrub that data, or we're going to move it to somewhere else. The worst thing you could do is try to hide the fact that you're doing it, and then it comes out. And that comes down to my point of being open and honest. This is also where you probably want to review things before you even get breached. So have a periodic basis where you go review the data that you're holding. And this is why things like GDPR have kind of helped, because they have forced companies to essentially do this. Is the data we're holding absolutely required? Is it necessary? Talking about that breach that I went to a few years ago, the data that was as a result of the breach never ever had to be returned. So reviewing things like not only where is this data being stored, but like where are you sharing this data? Like all that data got leaked out in a response somewhere, but there was absolutely no need for them to do that. And guess what? If they didn't do that, the breach wouldn't have happened in the first place. So periodically review your systems. This is why things like periodic security kind of design and architecture reviews are so important, and review your data that you're holding. And don't just do it as a once-off, do it periodically. So if there is any data that's no longer relevant, you can do something about it. And if you do get breached, that's where your plan comes in, your PR, and do something about it, be open about it.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much.
Okay, so we're running a bit low on time, but let's ask one more pre-submitted question for today. And I think it's a perfect question to sort of round off in terms of is there any materials, books that you recommend towards our audience in learning more about application security?
So there's going to be books that I recommend. What was it? The Web Hackers Handbook, I think. I can't remember it offhand. It's been a while since I read it. In terms of application security books per se, it is a bit sparse. And one of their reasons, like application security is a bit of a immature field. There's still things coming along. So I think as time goes on, we'll get more books in this field. I'm kind of drawing a blank off the top of my head, but I'd say, that was the web app. I can't remember. I can get the name for you if that helps.
I think I was searching on it. I think is it called the web application Hackers Handbook? I think something like that.
Yeah, I found that to be really good because that teaches you how to test, and then you can learn how to protect against it. Again, a lot of the books are unfortunately going to be focused on the attacking part and not much around the protecting part, like how do you do the security in, I don't know, Java or Python or something like that. But
Awesome.
In terms of a book, go to OWASP. Again, they have a whole bunch of resources. So they might even have book recommendations there, but like you could save yourself a few bucks anyway, getting all of that free off their site, and they got a whole wealth of information there that they'll get you on your way. That's kind of like the go-to for web app or application security. So OWASP.
You mentioned on OWASP. Is this on their directly on their site?
Sorry, did I mention?
As in, you mentioned a bunch of materials by OWASP.
Oh, I don't know if they have recommendations on this side. They might do. I haven't seen anything. I actually need to have a look because I actually got asked this question the other day. But yeah, even still, if you go to their site, there's like the different projects. The cheat sheets are probably a really good project to look at. So they cover a lot of topics, and that's probably something you would expect in a book. The OWASP 10 is another good site to start looking at. If you want to get involved in application security and start it off, OWASP Top 10 is definitely a really good starting place, and then go from there. And then as you go into each top 10, they'll give you examples in the description and some mitigation techniques that you can use.
Thanks for recommendations. I think yeah, some of these materials I've heard about them before. I think can't wait to check them out like after this event. Yeah. So I think yeah, we've come to close to the end to our stream today. But I think this was a really good sharing. I think there were really good anecdotes in there. You mentioned about things like don't panic when you have security issues, being open and transparent, letting experience drive your future iterations when breaches occur, and hardening your security using past experience. I think these are really great learning lessons that you have shared with us. Thanks again, Sean, for joining us today, and sharing with us your various experiences.
Thanks for having me, and thank you for the great questions. I really enjoyed it, and hopefully it was helpful and useful for everyone.
Very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we are coming to a close to today's event, but for our closing, few information to share, in regards to some of our coming events, in the coming month and week. So earlier on, before our at the start of our stream, Julius he did also introduce in regards to our newest event, Small Talk. Actually, again, like Julius mentioned, I didn't know there was a programming language called Small Talk. When we first planned for this event. In fact, I didn't even know the reference of that hot air balloon was referring to the logo of Small Talk. So it's actually quite interesting. You can look into the programming language for Small Talk. But the idea itself here is that this is going to be a bit more like a sort of like a podcast, where we are talking about experience in regards to the theme of that episode. So this one is going to be sort of our episode 0, where we are talking about mentoring experiences in the tech industry. All right, so this will be 2 weeks from now on the 17th of August. So do look out for our socials in terms of the the link itself for registering for this event, and we hope to see you there for this event. And following on from that episode 0, we're gonna have our pilot, or the proper episode 1, with a very big boss of our collaborators with Google, right? You might have seen or heard of him before, Bob. From Google, who is the head of startup ecosystem in the Southeast Asia region. So we're very excited to learn from him. In fact, he has worked in various different countries, and his experience is going to be one that's very interesting. Especially for, let's say, if you are in Singapore, even in the neighboring countries, in the Southeast Asia region, and you have not tried, working overseas in other countries. I think this would be something that you might want to attend in terms of learning. What are the fears, or what are the rewards coming from working in other places besides the home country where you're from, and basically also be able to see like from the different experiences that he has learned over the years. And not to mention, we are also going to continue our our main event, where we are getting our speakers to come in to share about their expertise on a certain topic. So the next one, following our today's event, right, is going to be growth mindset. My career, a work in progress, is going to be from a engineering manager in Facebook, Nadini. So do check out our social in regards to updates for these events, and we hope to see you there for this this event. And yes, as part of GDG Singapore, as well as GDG Cloud Singapore, we always want to look for speakers like you and I, who may have our private projects or public projects that we've worked on, definitely, if you have something that you're passionate to talk about, you want to share with the rest of our community, do write in to us at that link over there, and we'll get back to you, once we review your submission at the soonest. And as always, do sign up to our social stuff, YouTuber, like, share, subscribe, regular stuff. Okay, but to be serious, yeah, our regular updates are always going to be on our website as well as on our Facebook account. So usually events like this one today, as well as the few others that we have mentioned earlier on, we'll advertise them on our own website as well as on Facebook. So those are the two main pages. Of course, our community page as well, where you can register for our events to get the link to this, let's say for today's YouTube video. And also do subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is where we will be hosting, all of our live events. And yes, with that, we have come to the end of today's stream. It was a very, very interesting stream, and we hope to see you again, in our next one, which is going to be 2 weeks from now. Small talk. So see you guys. Bye.